I remember the day she brought me home. The air smelled like rain, and she held my hand so gently, as if I was made of glass. I was 6 years old, wearing a secondhand dress that was too big for me, and she smiled like she'd found something she'd been missing all her life. "From now on," she said softly, "you're my daughter. Forever." I didn't know what forever meant back then, but the way she said it made me believe it was something beautiful. That day, she gave me a room with yellow curtains and a teddy bear sitting on the pillow. I slept holding that bear every night for years because it reminded me that I belonged somewhere. She used to braid my hair every morning before school. Her hands smelled like coffee and lotion, and sometimes she hummed songs I didn't know. When I'd get scared at night, she'd come to my room and sit beside me, whispering stories until I fell asleep. I never once felt alone. In the mornings, she'd leave notes in my lunchbox, little hearts drawn next to my name. The teachers would smile when they saw them. "You're a lucky girl," they said. And I was. I believed I was the luckiest girl in the world. Every birthday, she'd bake me a cake herself, even though she wasn't good at baking. The frosting was always uneven, the candles leaned sideways, but it was perfect. She'd clap her hands and say, "Make a wish, my sunshine." And I'd always wish for the same thing, that she'd never stop loving me. When I fell off my bike once and scraped my knees, she ran out barefoot, panicking like I'd been shot. She kissed my forehead and told me, "You scared me half to death." I laughed through the tears because it felt good to be loved like that, to be wanted, even when I was hurt. We used to sit by the window on rainy days, drinking hot chocolate and watching the drops race down the glass. She'd let me pick which one would win, and I'd cheer for mine like it mattered. She'd laugh and say, "You always root for the underdog." I didn't know why that made her eyes so soft when she said it. At night, when she'd tuck me in, I'd ask her to promise again. "Promise me you'll always love me?" I'd whisper. She'd smile, brush my hair away, and say, "Always, sweetheart, always." There were photo albums on the shelf. Me and her arms at the park, me on my first day of school, me with cake on my face. Every picture had her smiling, proud, and happy. Sometimes I'd look at those pictures when she wasn't around and wonder how I got so lucky. When people at school asked if she was my real mom, I'd always nod quickly. "Of course she is," I'd say. "She's the only mom I've ever had." I never saw myself as adopted. I saw myself as hers, completely. One winter, I got sick, really sick. She stayed awake all night beside my bed, wiping my forehead with a damp cloth, whispering that I'd be okay. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and hearing her pray quietly. She said, "Please, don't take her from me." That's when I realized how much she loved me. I was her world, and she was mine. When I'd draw pictures for her, she'd hang them on the fridge like they were priceless art. She told everyone who visited, "She's going to be an artist one day." I didn't believe it, but hearing her say it made me feel important. Sometimes she'd tell me stories about the day she chose me. She said she saw me sitting in the corner, quiet, holding a broken toy. She said she knew right then, that's my girl. And every time she told that story, I felt like I was special, like I'd been chosen by love itself. Evenings were my favorite. We'd watch TV together, and she'd fall asleep halfway through, her hand still holding mine. The world felt small and safe, and her heartbeat was the sound of home. I remember once I asked her, "Why did you pick me?" She smiled and said, "Because you looked like you needed someone to stay." I didn't realize then how deeply those words would stay with me. Everything she did made me believe in forever. The way she called me her sunshine, the way she laughed when I made silly jokes, the way she kissed my forehead before leaving for work. It was all a rhythm, our rhythm. And in that rhythm, I found peace. Every hug, every smile, every bedtime story, it was a promise that I never doubted, a promise that felt stronger than blood. She was my mother, and I was her daughter. At least, that's what I believed. When I turned 11, I started noticing small changes, things that didn't make sense at first. She stopped waiting at the door when I came home from school. The warm, "How was your day?" became a quiet nod from across the room. At dinner, she talked less to me and more to my dad or to herself. I told myself she was just tired, that work was hard, that I shouldn't take it personally. Then one morning, I woke up to something different. She was humming again, the same tune she used to sing when she braided my hair. But this time, she wasn't humming for me. She was holding a baby. I remember standing at the doorway, frozen. The baby was wrapped in pink blanket, her little hand resting on my mother's chest. Mom looked at her like she was seeing the world for the first time. She smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. When she noticed me, she said, "Come meet your sister." Her voice was soft, gentle, full of warmth. I walked closer, staring at the tiny face. The baby's eyes were closed, her cheeks pink and perfect. Mom looked at me, still smiling, and said, "Isn't she beautiful?" I nodded. I wanted to say something sweet, something like, "She's adorable," but the words stuck somewhere in my throat. In that moment, I felt something strange, something heavy and new. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was fear. I didn't know what I was afraid of. Maybe losing the only thing I had ever truly believed in? That night, Mom didn't come to my room. For the first time since I could remember, she didn't tuck me in. I waited, staring at the door, until I fell asleep. Days turned into weeks, and the house filled with baby sounds. Crying, cooing, soft laughter. I tried to help. I'd hold the bottle when Mom needed a break. But she never really needed a break. She never asked me to help. Everywhere she went, the baby went with her. When she cooked, the baby's bassinet sat on the kitchen counter. When she watched TV, the baby slept in her lap. I'd sit beside her quietly, waiting for her to glance my way. Sometimes she did, a short, distracted smile, but most of the time, she didn't. One afternoon, I came home from school with a drawing I'd made, all of us together holding hands. I found her in the nursery, singing softly. I held out the drawing. "Look, Mom, it's us," I said. She glanced for a second and said, "That's nice, honey. Put it on the fridge." Then she turned back to the baby. I stood there for a while, clutching the paper, waiting for her to say something more. But she didn't. At dinner, I showed the drawing to my dad instead. He smiled and said it was beautiful, but his eyes were tired. He didn't notice that Mom barely looked at me once. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of crying. Not mine, hers, the baby. I walked to the nursery and saw Mom pacing back and forth, whispering lullabies. She didn't notice me standing there. She looked so peaceful holding her, so complete. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't part of that picture anymore. She started calling the baby my sunshine, the same word she used to use for me. The first time I heard it, I froze. I wanted to laugh or cry or scream. I didn't even know which. I just walked away and shut my door. After that, I began spending more time in my room. I'd do my homework quietly, eat dinner quietly, live quietly. Because somewhere deep inside, I thought if I made no noise, maybe she'd remember to miss me. On weekends, relatives would visit. They'd say things like, "She looks just like you," and "You must be so proud." Mom would smile, that soft, proud smile, and say, "She is my little angel." No one mentioned me. Sometimes I'd catch her watching the baby sleep, her face glowing in the dim light. I used to be the reason for that glow. Now I was just a shadow in the hallway. But even then, I didn't stop trying. I still made breakfast on her birthday, still drew her cards, still said I love you before school. She'd smile politely and say, love you too, the way people say thank you when a stranger holds the door. Every night, I whispered the same words I used to tell her before sleeping. Promise me you'll always love me. But this time, I whispered them to myself. That was the year I learned how love changes, how something that once felt like home can turn into a place where you no longer belong. And I didn't know it then, but that change was only the beginning. By the time I turned 13, the distance between us wasn't just emotional. It was visible, like an invisible wall that no one dared to mention. The baby had become a toddler, and the house now revolved entirely around her. Her laughter filled the rooms that once held my voice. Her drawings replaced mine on the refrigerator door. Her pictures took the frames that once showed me and Mom smiling together. I remember standing in the living room one afternoon, staring at a family photo on the wall. It was from years ago, Mom, Dad, and me, all holding each other, smiling like we had the whole world in our arms. Right next to it hung a new picture, Mom holding the baby in her arms, her face glowing, her eyes soft and warm. That look, the one I used to see every day, wasn't mine anymore. At dinner, I started sitting quietly. They'd talk about the baby's first words, her favorite color, the funny way she mispronounced things. I'd smile sometimes, but mostly I just listened. Mom never asked how my school was, or if I made new friends, or what I liked doing now. I began to wonder if she even remembered what my favorite color used to be. One weekend, she asked me to clean out my closet. She said the baby was growing fast, and we could use some of my old clothes for her. I nodded and did it without saying a word. When I handed her the small pile, she smiled and said, "You're such a good big sister." Big sister, not daughter, just big sister. That word hit harder than I expected. I started noticing how people looked at us in public. At the park, when someone asked if both girls were hers, she'd pause for a second before saying yes. That tiny hesitation, that one small breath, told me everything I needed to know. One day at school, we had a Bring Your Mom event. I gave her the invitation a week before, hoping she'd come like she used to. She said she'd try. The day came and every kid sat beside their mom, laughing, taking pictures, eating cupcakes. I kept glancing at the door, waiting for her to walk in. She didn't. I smiled anyway when my teacher came over and said, maybe she got busy, but I could feel something breaking quietly inside me. That evening, she apologized. She said the baby wasn't feeling well and that she couldn't leave her alone. I nodded. I said it was okay, and I meant it. Or at least I thought I did. A few months later, it was my birthday. 13. She used to make it special every year. The cake, the decorations, the little notes. This time she forgot. We had guests over that day, and everyone was busy with the baby's new toys. When the guests left, I went to my room and sat on the floor. There was no cake, no candle, no note in my lunchbox the next day. I told myself I was too old for those things anyway. The next morning, I overheard her on the phone with a friend. She laughed softly and said, "Sometimes I forget she's not mine. She just feels like my real daughter." I froze in the hallway. She wasn't talking about me. She was talking about the baby. And in that moment, something inside me went quiet forever. I stopped trying after that. Stopped asking for hugs, stopped waiting for her goodnight kisses, stopped showing her my drawings. Every effort felt one-sided, like loving a ghost. Then came the day everything truly broke. It was a Sunday morning. I was helping set the table for breakfast when the baby, now 5, spilled milk all over the floor. Mom rushed in worried, holding her and comforting her, saying, "It's okay, sweetheart, it's okay." Then she turned to me, her voice sharp and cold, and said, Can't you be more careful? You're older. You should know better." I hadn't even touched the glass, but she didn't notice. She never asked what really happened. I stayed quiet, cleaned up the mess, and went to my room. That was the first time I cried without making a sound. A few days later, I overheard her ask her something. "Mommy, why doesn't she look like us?" There was a pause. Mom's voice lowered. "She's adopted, honey, but we still love her." Still. That word didn't sound like love. It sounded like tolerance. Later that night, I sat in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I tried to find her in me, the woman who used to braid my hair and call me sunshine. But she was gone. The version of her that loved me existed only in my memories, in old photographs, in the sound of rain against the window. That was when I realized something I wish I hadn't. You can lose people who are still alive, and sometimes they don't even notice they're gone from you. So I stopped trying to belong. I started learning how to disappear quietly, without making her feel guilty for forgetting me. And maybe that's what being replaced really feels like. Not anger, not hate, just the slow fading of someone who once made you feel like you mattered.
Years passed, but nothing really changed, except me. By the time I turned 16, I had mastered the art of silence. I learned how to smile when I didn't feel like smiling. I learned how to act invisible in a house that once felt like home. Mom still lived under the same roof, but she existed in a world where I was a stranger who happened to pass by. She stopped calling me for dinner, stopped reminding me about school projects, stopped noticing when I was sick. The only time she said my name was when she needed something done. The baby, my little sister, wasn't a baby anymore. She was 8 now, bright and beautiful, everything Mom could ever want. They did everything together: school plays, shopping trips, movie nights. Sometimes they'd laugh so loudly that I'd close my bedroom door just to keep the sound from reaching me, because every laugh was a reminder of something I'd lost long ago. My dad still talked to me sometimes, but always in whispers, like love for me had become a secret he wasn't allowed to show. When I caught him glancing at me across the dinner table, I could see the guilt in his eyes, but he never said a word. I spent most of my time in my room, reading, writing, sketching. That little yellow curtained room, once filled with light and her laughter, had become a quiet corner of the house no one entered anymore. The teddy bear she gave me years ago still sat on my bed. Its fur was worn out, one button eye missing. I couldn't throw it away. It was the only thing that still felt like her. One night I overheard her talking to a friend on the phone again. "She's always so distant," Mom said. "She barely talks. I don't know what's wrong with her." Her friend replied, "Teenagers, you know how they are." Mom sighed. "Maybe she just doesn't love us the way she used to." I wanted to laugh or scream or tell her, "You're the one who left first." But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, my throat tight, my heart heavy. After that, I stopped waiting for her to notice. I stopped trying to prove anything, because no matter what I did, I could never compete with a child who shared her blood.
Every time I passed the family photo wall, it reminded me that time had erased me. New photos covered the old ones, vacations I wasn't invited to, birthdays I wasn't part of, smiles I didn't recognize anymore. School became my only escape. I stayed late, joined after-school clubs, volunteered for anything that kept me away from home. When people asked about my family, I lied. I told them my parents traveled a lot, that they were busy but kind. Because saying the truth, that I lived in a house where I didn't belong, hurt too much. One evening, I came home late after an art exhibition. Mom was sitting in the living room, scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in. "You should have called," she said flatly. "We were worried." But her tone didn't sound worried. It sounded annoyed. "I'm sorry," I said softly. She nodded without looking at me. Dinner's in the fridge. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. I ate alone, reheating cold food under yellow kitchen light, listening to their laughter echo from the other room. It was like living behind glass, seeing everything, feeling nothing. Sometimes I still caught myself hoping she'd come into my room at night, sit beside me, and say, "I miss you." But nights passed quietly, the house asleep except for the hum of the refrigerator. I started sleeping with my headphones on just to drown out my thoughts. Then one rainy evening, I found something. I was looking for a sketchbook under my bed and found an old shoebox, dusty, taped shut. When I opened it, I saw pieces of my childhood, drawings, birthday cards, and a faded photograph. It was me and Mom in the park, years ago. She was holding me in her arms, smiling so wide it almost looked unreal. Behind the photo, in small handwriting, it said, "My sunshine, forever." I don't know how long I stared at that picture. Tears fell before I even realized I was crying. It wasn't the kind of crying that came from anger. It was the kind that comes from remembering something you can never have again. That night, I placed the photo on my desk and looked at it until I fell asleep. For the first time in years, I whispered, "Good night, Mom." The words felt strange, heavy, and small. In the days that followed, I started writing again. Not to anyone, just to myself. Letters I'd never send. I wrote about her laugh, her promises, her perfume, the way she said forever. Maybe I was trying to hold on to pieces of her before they disappeared completely. But deep down, I knew she never would. People don't look for things they've already decided to forget. So I stopped expecting her to come back. I stopped waiting for her to love me again. Instead, I learned how to live with the silence, the kind that doesn't scream, doesn't break things, doesn't hurt on the surface, but quietly eats you from the inside until you forget what love was supposed to feel like. And by then, I had already forgotten. I was 18 the day I finally left that house. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when there's nothing left to say. Mom was in the kitchen, making breakfast. The smell of toast filled the air, the same way it used to when I was little. She didn't look up when I came in with my bag. She just said, "You're leaving early today." I nodded. "Yeah, I'm moving into the dorm." For a second, she paused, knife in hand, then gave a small smile. "Oh, right, college." That's all she said. Not, "I'll miss you," not, "I'm proud of you," just college, like it was another chore checked off her list. I wanted her to stop me, to ask if I was scared, or if I had enough money, or if I'd miss home. But she didn't. She didn't even turn around. I stood there, waiting for something, anything. And when it didn't come, I whispered, "Goodbye, Mom." She replied softly, still facing the counter, "Take care." Not even my name, just "take care." I walked out, dragging my suitcase down the hallway. The walls were lined with pictures, all of them smiling faces. Vacations, birthdays, school plays. I wasn't in most of them anymore. Some had been replaced entirely. As I passed the living room, I saw my little sister playing on the floor. She looked up at me and said, "Bye." I smiled and said, "Bye, sunshine." The word felt heavy in my mouth, like a memory I shouldn't have touched. Outside, the morning air was cool. The grass was still wet from last night's rain. It reminded me of the first day she brought me home, the same smell, the same quiet sky. Only this time, there was no hand holding mine. I walked to the bus stop, sat down, and looked back one last time. The house stood still, peaceful, ordinary, like nothing inside it had ever been broken. And maybe that's what hurt the most. The world kept moving like my absence wouldn't change a thing. When the bus arrived, I sat by the window and watched the road disappear behind me. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. There were no tears left, just a strange emptiness that felt too familiar to be painful. I remembered the first day she promised me forever, the way she smiled, the way her eyes softened when she called me her sunshine. I used to think love meant being chosen. Now I know love isn't about being chosen once. It's about being chosen every day. At college, people asked about my family. I said they were good, busy, living their lives. I smiled when I said it because it was easier than explaining the truth, that I had a mother who lived just a few miles away, but we were worlds apart.
Some nights, when it rained, I'd sit by the window and think of her. I'd imagine her tucking my sister into bed, humming that same lullaby she once sang to me. And I wondered if she ever thought of me, the girl she'd once called her daughter. I kept that old photograph in my drawer, the one where she held me in her arms, both of us smiling like forever was real. Sometimes I'd take it out and trace the edges with my fingers, like touching the past could bring it back. Years later, on my 21st birthday, I sent her a letter. No anger, no accusations, just words I'd kept buried for too long. I told her I was doing fine, that I hoped she was happy, that I still remembered the promise she made. And at the end, I wrote, "You may have forgotten, but I never stopped loving you." I never got a reply. Maybe she never read it. Maybe she did and didn't know what to say. Maybe silence was her answer. But I've learned to live with silence. It no longer hurts the way it used to. It's just there, a part of me. Sometimes I see mothers and daughters at the park, laughing, holding hands, taking pictures. And for a brief second, I feel that old ache again. Then I remind myself, I was loved once, even if it didn't last, even if it changed. Love existed, and that's enough. I still keep that teddy bear. It sits by my bed in my apartment, its fur worn, its smile crooked. It reminds me of who I was, a little girl who believed in forever. And maybe forever wasn't meant to last. Maybe it was just meant to teach me what love feels like, so that when I find it again, I'll recognize it. Because even after everything, I still believe in love. And maybe somewhere deep inside her heart, she still loves me too.
If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Tears and Truths and watch more stories that speak where words fall silent.